Well, I think for me it started with being a teenager who was looking for love, really, for ultimately my father's love. I didn't realize it at the time, but living in a family situation that was difficult with a father who was an alcoholic, when I reached my teens, I was really searching. And so in that search, I was introduced to the idea that you could separate love from sex, and that sex could be a recreational activity. So the notion that you could separate sex from love and that it could be a recreational activity, if you will, was introduced to me as a grade 11 high school student. And so I became vulnerable to that idea and found myself going to a party, not telling the truth about my whereabouts that night, and I experienced rape. So, of course, it was a very terrible experience. It's something I wanted to forget about. I was so ashamed of the fact that I had gone to this party, that I had lied about my whereabouts that night, and when I had that little voice inside that warned me not to go to the party, I didn't listen to it because I had been deceptive. I had told my parents I'd be in one place. I told the people that I was boarding with at the time that I would be in another place. And so when I got to the door and I remember knocking on the door thinking, gee, I really shouldn't be here. And I didn't listen to that little voice inside. So, I think if I was going to start somewhere, it's that little voice inside, that knowledge inside when something is right, when something is wrong, something is true, something is false. And I knew that I was standing in a deception. I knew that I was walking into something I shouldn't walk into. So when I experienced being raped, for many years, I would carry all the full guilt of that, as though it was my full responsibility. And so when I discovered that I was pregnant, I tried to hide it from myself. I buried my head in the sand for about 8 weeks, and then it was clear that I was pregnant. I was experiencing morning sickness, and I worked in a family restaurant, and it was interfering with my work, and a colleague said to me, Angelina, what happened? And I said, well, I told her my story. I went to a party, I experienced rape. She said, you might be pregnant. And I said, I don't think so. I don't want to believe that. But after 8 weeks, I did a home pregnancy test and discovered that I was, in fact, pregnant. So this colleague of mine had told me there was a phone number I could call and I would find help. The help I found was an abortion referral agency. So I made the phone call, and essentially the woman drew the story out of me, what happened. And then she said, well, of course you don't want to be pregnant. Of course you don't want your parents to find out. Of course you want to finish high school. You want to, not be a teen mom. So it's really simple. All you have to do is gather up $250 and find some friends to drive you here to Toronto, and we can solve your problem. So we didn't really talk about how that was going to be solved. We didn't talk about the abortion experience and what that would be like and what all that would entail. So I arrived in Toronto and was referred to an abortion facility in Buffalo, New York. So we drove to Buffalo, my friends and myself, and they dropped me off. And that day was a turning point in my life, like nothing else that I've ever experienced. And I had no idea that 5 minutes could turn my life into such a unhappy, regrettable, that a 5-minute experience could turn my life into something so unhappy and so regrettable. So my friends dropped me off. I entered the facility, handed over my money, signed a waiver, and every time I sign a waiver, I have a trigger. Like even this morning, it was like, there's this surrendering yourself over. And that's essentially what I did. And when I signed that waiver, I said that nobody would be responsible for what would happen to me afterwards except myself. So I went into the facility. I was directed to gown for the procedure and then to enter the actual room where the abortion took place. And for many, many years, I could not remember what happened there because it was such a traumatic event that I blocked it from my memory. But when I lost a child 14 years after the fact, through an ectopic pregnancy, then all of the blocked memories started to come back to me. And I could remember what happened that day. I could remember signing the waiver. I could remember the uncomfortableness of, going into this room and gowning and then getting up on the abortion table. And then I could remember the things that I had tried to block. And when I look at it now, it's no wonder I tried to block it, because it was a very horrible experience to undergo the experience of abortion, surgical abortion, to experience that violation of my being using the instruments that dismembered the child, the feelings of the coldness, the feelings of the pain. I was told that it wouldn't hurt, and in fact it did. It was excruciatingly painful. And then, of course, the sounds, the sights, the sounds, like it affected me on every level of my being, emotionally, physically, in my spirit. And I remember as I lay there on the table wondering, really, is there really a child? As I watched the bottle next to my right foot fill up. And and I can remember this sense of death that entered the room and entered my being. It was like something was final. Something was no longer retrievable, no longer to be reversed. Nothing could undo what had happened. And for me, that was such a traumatic moment. It's like, even when I think about it at this moment, it's like that sense of not being able to pull something back. You can't undo this. Well, that feeling was something that haunted me. That how permanent it was, how powerless I was to change it, and I couldn't reconcile that. And I didn't know what to do with it. And so I walked out of the abortion facility crying uncontrollably. I kept trying to swallow my tears. I remember catching a glimpse of myself in the bus window. I took a bus back to Toronto. And I remember that all-consuming feeling of self-hatred that came over me. It's like, you can't undo this. And what you've done is wrong. I remember sitting next to a very kind woman, and she talked to me and she said, "How are you?" And she was very kind, and I just put up the wall of deception and I said, "I'm fine," as I turned my head to the window and cried some more. And I left that abortion facility a changed person. And to try to cope with the memories of everything that led up to the abortion and the actual abortion experience, I began to bury myself in alcohol and drugs and in serial sexual encounters, always looking for those words. You're not a horrible person. You are lovable. You are forgiven. You are forgivable. But of course, I never found them. And it wasn't until I lost our son, Joseph Michael, 14 years after the fact. As I grieved his death, then I began to piece together the experience of the abortion, to recall the memories, to really embrace the memories, to not run from them, to not be afraid of them, but to face them honestly, to work through them, to name them, and to grieve the loss of my first child. So every year since 2004, we've been gathering men and women from across Canada to share their testimonies. And it's the first people that really responded to our message of hope and healing were the people who support the March for Life. And I can remember the first response, like people were so in awe, first of all, that we had the courage to stand and tell the truth about what abortion had done to our lives, and then thankful because it was in the open. And so many people know someone who's had the experience of abortion. So by hearing our testimonies, it affirmed them in what they might already know, or it gave them the courage to face their own abortion experience and to find healing. Or perhaps it also saved a life. And I know there are stories of women who were abortion-minded and heard our testimonies, and as a result chose life, not to end the life of their child, but to give life to their child. Every time I give this testimony, I'm left with the one thing that I want people to walk away with, and that is to choose life, to let life win.